I could have your attention. Distinguished guests, staff and participants of the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and I can confirm that there are a number of girls and boys in the audience tonight. Welcome to you all. Welcome to Opportunities in Australia's Space Industry, the third in our 2019 series of SHSSP public events. My name's Michael Davis, and as well as being the MC this evening, I have the pleasure of being the chair of the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies Program Management Committee. A week ago, I also had the pleasure of handing over the chairmanship of the Space Industry Association of Australia to Mr. Rod Drury, and I wish him and his board the best of success in that role. In welcoming you this evening, I remind you that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. We acknowledge their living culture and we pay our respects to their elders. This is the 8th time that this intensive 5-week professional development program has been held on this campus in Adelaide. This year, with 46 participants from 12 countries, our focus is on the many dimensions of the global space industry, ranging from the study of the origins of the universe to human and robotic space exploration, to propulsion and satellite engineering, to space policy, law and commerce, and many other topics as well. But tonight is our opportunity to learn about what's happening in the host country, Australia. We will learn about the recent developments in Australia's long and proud history of space activity. We will hear about a renewed national commitment to the growth of our industry, the creation of exciting career opportunities for our clever professionals, including many of the graduates of our previous, current and future programs, and the potential for this industry to capture a greater share of the growing international space economy and to become a key contributor to national and regional economic growth. Tonight we have a distinguished panel of industry, university and private sector experts and governmental experts as well, representing the diversity of the space sector in this country. We also have 2 very distinguished guest speakers. The UniSA Mawson Lakes campus is part of the City of Salisbury, one of Australia's leading local government bodies in terms of encouraging and supporting high technology industry and economic development. We are honoured to have the City of Salisbury as our main sponsor of this event this evening, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome once again one of the key members of Council, Councillor Graham Reynolds from the City of Salisbury, and I now invite him to come forward and say a few words. Councillor Reynolds.
No, thanks, Mike, for that introduction, and it's great to know that I'm regarded as a key member of Council, because I wasn't aware of that. Thanks for the promotion. Much appreciated. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's event, Opportunities in Australia's Space Industry. Tonight you'll hear from industry and industry experts about how sustainable space industry can be created in South Australia and the opportunities this brings. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Megan Clark, AC, Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Space Agency. It's great to be able to say that. Mr. Michael Davis, Chair of the Space Industry Association of Australia, and thank the industry representatives we have here for your time tonight. Now, South Australia has had a long affiliation with space and space-related innovation, beginning with the launch of Australia's first satellite 51 years ago from Woomera, to the establishment of the South Australian Space Industry Centre, the nation's first dedicated centre to grow the local space economy and create future high-tech jobs. South Australia absolutely has been a leader. And now Adelaide's been chosen as the location and the home for Australia's space agency. an organisation whose key objective is to support the continued growth of this industry here and throughout Australia. Now, I remember being at this event about 12 months ago, and at that time, those of us, and I was on the panel, were advocating heavily for South Australia to be the home of the Space Agency. And, you know, for me in particular, I was hoping that it was actually going to be in Salisbury, because we got it. Right, I'll just point it out, Doctor, Salisbury's crest. What other council in Australia has a rocket right in the middle of their crest? That's what I was hoping for. It didn't happen, that's okay. But here we are now, 12 months later, talking about an industry that has the opportunity to revolutionise Australia's economy with its head agency right here in Adelaide. And, you know, today's space industry is not really about the big projects anymore. And, you know, I'm talking there about the International Space Station, you might talk about Voyager, you might talk about Mars. I mean, it's not even about, as much as I love the rockets, they're great, it's not even about rockets anymore. Okay, the space industry these days, we're talking about the CubeSats, we're talking about data links, data capture, we're talking about collection, processing, analysis, turning all of that into what are called actionable intelligence. That's the space industry. It's about, you know, cheaper and deeper space explorations. And as the technology continues to revolutionise the way we live, the way we work, the way we relate to one another, and as the billions of people connect through mobile devices, space technologies will help us bridge the gaps of distance, connecting people more closely than ever before, revolutionising industries and opening up possibilities that's only limited by our imagination. And the South Australian innovation ecosystem is well placed and able to capitalise on these opportunities. We have an active civil and defence space community made up of industries, universities, research centres, government organisations and entrepreneurs. And for many years, the City of Salisbury has been home to a large number of space and space-related companies and organisations forming this community, and we've got many sitting on tonight's panel. You know, in Salisbury, we've got RAF Base Edinburgh, which is home to the #1 remote surveillance unit, and they're responsible for the Air Force's space-based capabilities. We've got Defence Science and Technology Group at Edinburgh. We've got UniSA right here in Mawson Lakes. If I look at the civil companies, and I know I'll probably forget a few guys, so sorry about that, but we've got Saab Australia, we've got Lockheed Martin, we've got BAE Systems, we've got Speedcast, we've got Topcon, we've got Daramont, we've got CEA Technologies, we've got Airbus Defence, and of course we've got Nova Systems. And yet we've still got newer companies setting up right here in Salisbury. We've got Solinov, we've got Silentium Defence, we've got Citadel Australia, and we've got Myrota. Now, this region has always supported space industry capability. Now, I grew up and I live in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, but I've also lived a few years in the eastern states in my time with the Air Force. And, you know, if you've lived in the eastern states, you know they have a saying that when you come to Adelaide, what do? You turn your watch back half an hour in 20 years, right? Well, with the Australian Space Agency now based here in Adelaide, and with all the opportunities this now presents us here in Adelaide, in the near future, we want to be able to say to those eastern states people, you know, we want to have them saying, when you arrive in Adelaide, sure, turn your watch back half an hour, but you've got to put your clocks forward 20 years, right? That is the potential that locating the Australian Space Agency here in Adelaide brings us. Brings opportunities for me, brings opportunities for you, now and into the future. So this year's program brings together 52 students from 11 countries, I'm reliably informed, reinforcing that this is a global industry, and showcases the key activities and areas of knowledge required in today's space professions. And for the young people out there, and let's face it, young is a relative term, thinking about what do you want to do after school or university. Sorry, I've got an old person, sorry John, I know him, it's okay, he's laughing at that. Sorry. Or even looking for a career change. You can have a fantastic career in space without even leaving Earth. Or, you know, you could even leave Earth if you want to. You could be a space flight controller, you could be a satellite controller, you could be a software engineer, you could be a satellite engineer, you could be an aerospace engineer. We can never have enough engineers, right? Space medicine, space psychology. There's even space lawyers out there. I know there's someone out here tonight who wants to be a space lawyer as well. Where are they? Right, we've got a few space lawyers here. Even the lawyers are getting in on this one, okay? You've got many options, you've got many opportunities out there, and they can take you across and maybe even out of this earth. So on behalf of the City of Salisbury, I'd like to acknowledge the continued efforts of UniSA and the International Space University in putting together another standout program that we have this year. We're proud to be supporting this program again and sponsoring this event. Now, this evening's panel comprises of some of the best people in the space industry located in Adelaide. Take this opportunity to get as much from them as you can to understand what a future space industry in South Australia looks like, what the opportunities are and how they got there. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to City of Salisbury. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham Reynolds. We're honoured to have as our keynote speaker this evening Dr. Megan Clark AC, the head of the Australian Space Agency. I believe that Megan was a geologist in her original incarnation, and she is now widely regarded as one of Australia's leading and most respected scientists, having in a former life been the Chief Executive of the CSIRO. Since her appointment by the Commonwealth Government to the Expert Reference Group and subsequently as head of the Australian Space Agency, Dr. Clark has shown outstanding leadership and vision for our renewed national space program. And if I may say so, she has assembled a most impressive and committed team of professional staff members to assist her in her mission. It gives me very great pleasure to invite Dr. Clark to speak.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for your leadership of SIAA. Welcome to all of the students for this program. I think it's absolutely wonderful. When I was in year 11, I managed to get to a camp on science, and it completely changed my life. I learnt to sleep sitting up, which was very useful later on in my university career. But I also got to connect with basically a bunch of nerds who'd spend a week of their holidays learning about science. And so I know that you've connected with people that you will link with for the rest of your life, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. I also respectfully acknowledge the people of the Kaurna Nation, and I wanted to share with you something that we've literally just put together, which is the branding for the agency. And a big shout out to Paul, who's in the audience. So Paul Curnow helped us advising on this, but I'll just let this that Australians will come to love the symbol of the Australian Space Agency that really honours our 65,000 years of history, really puts Australia on the map but takes all of us together into the future, and that was really what we were trying to represent in the logo. So we're starting to love it ourselves. Tonight, what I wanted to cover for you, which is really what Michael outlined, was look at the opportunities Look at also the Space Agency, what its purpose is. I want to give you a bit of a snapshot of what we've done. We're 6 months old, just up to 6 months old, and we've done a fair bit in that time, and I wanted to sort of share that with you, give you a little bit of an update, and also look very briefly at Australia's strategic priorities. So one of the roles of the agency is to set the national civil space priorities, and I wanted to touch on those very, very briefly. So, as Graham mentioned, we have a very proud history. I didn't know about the Salisbury coat of arms there, but I'll never forget that now when I actually see that. We had, when I was with CSIRO, we had a most amazing letter from Neil Armstrong, who in his very humble fashion said to us, it wasn't extraordinary that we walked on the moon, when of course it was hugely extraordinary. What he said was extraordinary was that the whole world was watching. And what he was trying to do was signal to the people who were part of that journey at Honeysuckle Creek, and of course, forever made famous now in the film The Dish. He was trying to signal the part of Australia in such an extraordinary event and the role that we played. We also, of course, as Michael outlined, and Graham alluded to, we were right there at the very beginning. We built our national satellite. We were the third country to do that. We launched that from our own territory. But the reality is that we lost that place. We didn't pick up that opportunity that we'd set in the 60s, and now we have a fair bit of catching up to do. We are late to this party, but we have the creativity, we have the smarts, we have the entrepreneurship, we have the ability. We now have the will, and so we really need to get cracking and move forward on this. The purpose of the agency is very simple, and that is to transform, not just grow, but to transform our industry here and make sure that that industry is globally respected, and that's very important. Of course, it must lift the broader economy, but it also must touch the lives of every Australian as we take our place in the world. We simply cannot do that without national and international partnership and engagement. We must work together as a nation. We're small. We certainly don't have the funding of the bigger nations, and we cannot do this alone. So our partnerships will be absolutely vital for us. Our first 6 months, we modernised the Space Act. So now it actually includes high-powered rocket. It includes being able to launch spacecraft from aircraft. It has stepped up and modernisation that we needed, and we're currently writing the enabling legislation and regulations that will sit below that. We've done more launch licences in our first 6 months for Australian assets to be launched offshore than we've done in the last 3 decades. So, and there's certainly a big pipeline of things coming down the track. I mentioned partnerships. We've already signed agreements with the French Space Agency, CNES, with the UK Space Agency, with Canadians, and we've also started to work closely with industry to say, how do we work together to build this? So statements of strategic intent as to how industry is going to work in Australia to help build not just their business, but research, partnerships, investment in people, investment in education. And so that's gone very well. We've got Nova Systems, which we literally just signed, and I've never seen anyone so excited when we signed it. It was actually phenomenal. I think you sat there, you brought tears to everyone's eyes going, this was a dream I had as a kid. So it was extraordinary. With Airbus has already chosen Australia to be the launch and retrieval site for the first high-altitude pseudo-satellite. That will be in West Australia. They've already chosen to locate one of their control centres now. They actually moved a satellite from one of their constellations and moved it so that it was over our region, and Adelaide will be the home of that. Citadel, the first satellite manufacturer to set up in Australia, Italian company. These are really important steps along the way. We've been working with the states and territories. We're absolutely delighted that our new home will be here. We have a broad vision to build something really significant here in Adelaide, and not just set up the home, but actually set up infrastructure as well. What's extraordinary is we set ourselves the goal of 5 million Australians would hear, see or read about the agency in our first 12 months. We actually blew by that in the first 3 weeks, and we've only got 25 million Australians, so now we're up to 48 million Australians as of a few weeks ago, which means they're hearing, seeing and reading about us over and over again. Why is that important? Because it sends such an important message to our Australian government that the Australian people believe that this is a really good way to spend taxpayers' money. There has been no criticism of the spending of taxpayers' money on this. It's just been enthusiasm across the board, from little kids all the way through. So this is a real national effort, and you can feel that national sense of spirit coming through. The responsibilities of the agency to set national policy, to coordinate our domestic activities, as well to support the growth of the space sector. Look at where the gaps and challenges are and help the sector overcome those challenges. We will also be the front door. We were missing a sort of front door to engage internationally, and I can remember, Michael will remember this, so Michael was on the expert review group, and we wrote, we needed a sort of one door, one voice. Well, we sort of wrote it and we sort of believed it, but when we actually opened the door, it's been unbelievable. And we didn't predict that. The whole world has said, well, it took you a long time, it's about time, so they chastised us first. But the next thing is we've been absolutely waiting to engage with you. In fact, the French president, when he met with our Prime Minister, Prime Minister Turnbull, he said, we know that when the Australians get their act together in space, they will be a fierce competitor. So I'm not sure even we believed that at the time. So, but the French president was completely convinced. We also need to administer the legislation and obligations, and we have obligations which I will cover both bilaterally and multilaterally. And importantly, we want all Australians to be able to look at what's happening in space with our partners and go, that's Australian. That might not be the whole satellite or the whole mission, but that piece, that little bit, that's us. And to really feel proud when they see what Australia can do. We cannot cover everything, so let me quickly cover some of the areas that we believe are very important priorities for Australia. Obviously, communication technology services and ground stations. No other country puts ground stations in their strategy. No one. Because they go, well, it's not a high-end business, it's not that complicated. But Australia, it absolutely makes sense. We look into the solar system, we look into the galaxy. Anyone from the Northern Hemisphere here knows that the stars here are unbelievable because we look right into the galaxy, into that Milky Way. We are perfectly positioned. We're a big country. We are a very good place to connect with space. Communication, absolutely vital for an island, for the world. 3/4 of the current space market internationally and nationally is for communication. We're the country that invented Wi-Fi. We don't want to miss out on the next jump of communication. And the next jump, of course, will involve light. So while everyone's talking about getting 5G wireless networks here, we have already seen the tests that the German DLR have done over 10.4 kilometres from the lab to the mountaintop, 13 terabytes a second communication. Now that's everything ever written, downloaded in 30 seconds. So for all of the young people in the room, you have to figure out what you're going to do with 13 terabits a second. Because we can't even imagine that. And that's 500 times what you'll get with 5G. That's not a long way in the future. Australia already has discussions for the first ground station, commercial ground station, to do that. So this is an area where we absolutely want to participate. The problem with bringing a laser down, the first time they brought a laser down, they kept getting this intermittent signal, but it wasn't regular, it was random, and they couldn't work out why it was random. They checked everything, and it was coming, it was going, and then it was on for a while, and then it was off for a long while. till they finally checked the receiver and there was a great big Australian huntsman sitting in this wandering back. That's the problem with laser, you know, a huntsman can stop you dead in your tracks. So a lot to cover. Space situational awareness, we are already a major player in the global network that tracks the over 22,000 pieces of debris that are moving around that are sizable. We have the C-band radar at Harold Holt Centre in Exmouth in West Australia, and we will have the optical space telescope that will be stationed there as well. And the optical gives us the capacity to look in those sort of geostationary orbits much higher up. And so Australia is one of the major parts of that network that's managed by the United States. We also have the capacity to extend that into supporting commercial activities. So not just the support for military, but to extend that into commercial. Some fantastic stuff already happening here in Australia, where companies like Innovor are being able to track permanent custody of space debris. We're already looking at the capacity of lasers to be able to take a piece of debris and gently move it out of the path of a satellite, hopefully not into the path of someone else's. Depends who's paying the bill, I suppose. But we have some really creative stuff. Desert Fireball project, which was a set of very inexpensive but I think truly elegant set of sensors to track meteorite entry, has been picked up in partnership with Lockheed Martin. These are the sort of things that Australia can do. So we will take our role here. It's also one of the few areas where we can step up and be a responsible global citizen. We can't help with everything, but this is one area where Australia can show that in this region and globally we will be responsible, we will adhere to a rules-based order for space, and we will be part of making sure that our activities in space are for the appropriate purpose. Position, navigation and timing is so vital, and what was so important in the announcement of the Space Agency was the government also announced that we would upgrade Australia's position, navigation and timing. We access many of the positioning satellite systems that are available. We're one of the few countries that accesses all 6. But we did not have world-class positioning. So roughly 5 metres, 10 metres, we were behind the rest of the world. So the government had provided some significant money to Geoscience Australia to bring that up to 10 centimetre accuracy across all of our land mass, all of our maritime jurisdictions, so we're one of the countries that has the largest maritime border as well, and all of our airspace. Now 10 centimetres is less than the span of your hand. It's usually about 21 centimetres. So half that, that's a major step up. But that really just caught us up to the rest of the world. What absolutely took the world by surprise is that they also provided money that in our capital cities where we have the mobile phone network and you can get an additional correction, that we will go to 3 centimetre accuracy anywhere in Australia where you have, in our cities, where you have a mobile phone network coverage. That is world leading. So in one step, you know, we said we'll catch up and then we're going to go to world leading. And that caught people's attention, I can assure you. So Geoscience Australia will cover all of that. Earth observation, we were one of the few countries that Geoscience Australia, I think, did something absolutely beautiful. And I love this image. It just looks like a single image, but it's not. It's a compilation over time of the water resources in Northern Australia, an area in Northern Australia. And the colours tell you whether the water has been there for decades or whether it's transient. And what's extraordinary here is that Geoscience Australia we didn't have our own satellite for Earth observation, so we got really smart at saying we'll use everybody else's. And they took 40 years of Earth observation data from Landsat, from the old French satellites as well. Everything that we had, they drove it to the supercomputer in Canberra, physically drove it because it was in tapes, and they took basically sort of that 10 square metres block all across Australia and all across our coastal regions. and they rectified it. So they made sure that they were all perfectly sitting on top of each other. They even had to correct for continental drift, because apparently over 40 years we've moved a little bit north. So they corrected for all that so that these images would sit beautifully and perfectly on top of each other. Anyone who's ever played in that space know that that's really difficult. They did that, and now for any part of Australia you can go to it and say, give me 40 years of data superimposed. It leads the world. We now have several countries that want to copy that system, and we're working on that. Space Services, Gordon's here in the audience. I remember meeting Gordon early on in the program, and Australia's been advising NASA for 40 years on human spaceflight because of our work in Antarctica, which was actually something that I wasn't fully aware of. And yet, Gordon, remind me, we have never had a lead doctor on any of the missions, have we?
We've had Australian-born astronaut positions, yes, which I'd love to see. We've had an Australian working for NASA as a sort of visitor, helping out with extreme environments. But you're right, we need to get an Australian flag on the Australian spacesuit. Hopefully it's a doctor.
And of course, there's other things coming as well with space tourism. Think about, even though you're only up there for 3 to 4 minutes, this is a whole different group of people. This is the public being able to go to space for suborbital flight, which we were just chatting about as well. So that's going to require some additional services. And of course, being able to add additional power capability. So you've got a satellite up there, being able to either add or repower a satellite. These are all things that we can get involved with. For Australia, we lead the world in remote asset management. We manage areas bigger than the whole of the United Kingdom, from 1,500 kilometres away in Perth. There's no question that our automation, we have the largest robot on Earth, which is the automated rail in the Pilbara. We have some of the most sophisticated automated ports in the world. We lead the world in this, and when you think about it, if you can run the Pilbara from 1,500 kilometres away, you can run anything in space. So we think that this is a wonderful area for Australia to take what we do in space and bring it to Earth, take what we do on Earth in this country and take it into space. There's areas where we definitely need to catch up, where we don't lead the world. We don't really have that position yet, but we have the germ, the kernel of some really exciting stuff. Paddy's propulsion stuff, we were just chatting, Paddy's around somewhere. Paddy's propulsion technology, we've got quantum computing, we've got novel ways, as I said, of tracking space debris, wonderful orbital tracking work. We've got some real innovations, but to catch up, we're going to have to support them to leapfrog, and that's a critical area for us. We want to inspire this nation. Nothing inspires nations like the space industry. It's because humans can set their ambition on tackling interplanetary exploration. We can set our sights on colonisation off our planet. We can set our sights on discovering life off our planet. And you can dream this big because of the space technologies that we have brought back to Earth and have transformed what we do here on Earth. And we absolutely want to make sure that Australia takes its role, as it can do, in the world to become a leader in the space sector. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you so much, Megan. Now I'd like to invite our expert panel to join us up the front, joined by Dr. Clark. And I'll introduce each one as you step up, starting with Hannah Shearer. Hannah is one of the rising stars of the Australian space industry. She's the technical lead of the Australian aerospace programs for Northrop Grumman in Adelaide. Before she arrived in Australia, have a seat, Hannah. She had a very interesting career in Northrop Grumman in the United States, including working on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is a fascinating international project, and I hope you get a chance to tell us a little bit about the James Webb project. She's a graduate in aerospace engineering from the University of California and has a master's degree in management science and engineering from Stanford University. So please welcome Anna Shearer. Richard Price is the Chief Executive of Defence SA. He was appointed in October 2017, and as a result of that appointment, he was automatically also appointed to the position of Chief Executive of the South Australian Space Industry Centre. And this was probably the first such organisation established by a state government in Australia. And again, I hope he has a chance to explain the relevance and the importance of the work of his centre in eventually arriving at the decision by the Commonwealth Government to appoint Adelaide as the headquarters for the Australian Space Agency. He has a background in defence and public safety over 25 years, and was at one stage Managing Director of Saab's Australian operations. He's an engineering graduate from the University of Wales in the UK and also a graduate of the Melbourne Business School of Advanced Management. Please welcome Richard Price. Peter Nikolov is a very good friend of mine, and that's very fortunate because he didn't send me his CV. I'm doing this from memory, but Peter was a founder of Nova Systems, one of Australia's most successful aerospace consulting firms, and he has been a driving force behind the promotion and the establishment of the Australian Space Program. He is very actively involved in a very important cooperative research centre bid, which you will hear about this evening. And he's also Secretary of the Space Industry Association of Australia. So it's a great pleasure to have Peter on the panel. Andrew Sissifat is Principal Technologist for BAE Systems Australia, and he's been working in the advanced electronics and electronic warfare field for the last 15 years. He's also one of our rising stars. He has developed various radio frequency and electro-optic sensors, flight testing and missiles, and now looks after BAE Systems Australia's advanced manufacturing and space research portfolios. So please welcome Andrew. Mark Ramsey, also a very good friend, is General Manager for SITAL Australia, a subsidiary of the Italian small satellite manufacturer SITAL. He's a space industry professional with over 15 years' experience in a diverse range of technical and leadership roles, including roles at Thales Alenia Space in Europe, BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin and USAT. Please welcome Mark Ramsey. And last but not least, Professor Andy Coronius, who's the Dean of Industry and Enterprise at the University of South Australia. He has a very distinguished career with academic qualifications in electrical engineering, computing and education, including a PhD from the University of Queensland. He's actually leading, and it's great to have him here this evening because I know how busy he is right now. He's actually leading the bid to establish a space industry-focused cooperative research centre, one of the biggest bids that has ever been assembled under the CRC program. And I'm sure he'll have an opportunity to explain it a little bit more to you this evening. So it's fantastic to have Andy here as the representative of the University of South Australia. Please welcome Andy. So the plan this evening is to ask the panel a couple of questions that they've had a little bit of time to consider, and then to open up a free-flowing conversation but among the panel and with you, the audience. And so I'm going to encourage you to ask questions, but please put up your hand and wait for a microphone because we're being streamed live on the internet, and so we want to be able to, our audience on the internet, to hear your questions as well as our audience here. So before we do that, let me just ask the questions of the panel, starting on my far left with Hannah. My first question is, what do you anticipate will be the role of your organisation in contributing to the development of the Australian space industry and the goals of the Australian Space Agency over the next decade? Starting with you, Hannah.
So I think, so I represent one of the large primes that exist here in Australia, and I think some of the roles that our organizations can support are investing in research and technology and ventures like the SmartSat CRC, helping do industry-driven research and technology development, partnering with universities and other industry partners, etc. I think STEM investment in all of you in the audience here, those in primary school and secondary schools, investing in that and giving back to the communities through corporate citizenship efforts is also incredibly huge, where we can help encourage individuals to enter fields of engineering, science, mathematics, and continue those on into their postgraduate studies and find jobs here in Australia. And then I also think, you know, as we consider opportunities within defence and the commercial spectrum, where can we partner with local industry and help find ways that we can work and deliver Australian solutions to our defence and commercial customers. So I think those are just some of the ways.
Richard, you're next.
So I think the role of the South Australian government really, for a lot of years, was actually to try and support the enthusiasm of the space sector within the state. There was a lot of people in this room who actually contributed their time over many, many years to keep the flame alive and to actually build up the momentum that eventually led to the creation of the Space Agency. We, as a state government, need to support the Space Agency in keeping that flame burning even brighter. There's a risk that everybody says, we have a space agency now, we've done our piece, and we lose the momentum. There's a long, long way to go. So what, as a state government, can we do? One thing we can do is support efforts in our education system to bring space into the curriculum. Why would we do that? Well, for the thing that was said earlier by Megan, is it's one of these few things that actually support us kids. And we need more kids to take up engineering in particular. As an engineer, I think that, mathematicians as well. But importantly, we need to do that as a society because the world is changing. We've relied too much on commodities for a long, long time. We need to add more value and we need to take a much more prominent place in the world when it comes to modern advanced manufacturing. So to help the Space Agency transform education is really important for the state government. Industry needs to take the lead on creating technology and creating jobs. It's not the job of government to actually do that. It's the job of government to create an environment where that can thrive and that can happen. So not only is it about creating the workforce and the people who've got that enthusiasm to be part of this journey, it's also about supporting efforts to build capability, whether that's through the universities, through the CRCs, making sure that not only do we have people, we actually have technologies that industry can then take forward.
Nova's, I guess, mantra since we started was really to support capabilities in Australia. We're a bunch of really passionate people, traditionally a lot of them from the military, so looking after the military systems that our fellow Australians actually need to use to protect and defend the country. So we're really passionate about doing the right thing there, solving those really critical problems. And that's really transitioned across to the space sector. That's one of our biggest and fastest growing areas, and the critical importance of space and the sovereign use of space, our ability to do that in Australia is actually vital. So we've been growing and supporting that part of the, I guess, the industry. And we're doing that not just through the tasking, growing our own workforce and tasks, but we've also been doing that for many years in supporting other communities, parts of the ecosystem. So being a member of the Space Industry Association is one way that we've actually made massive changes and encouragement to growing leadership in Australia. The CRC, the Cooperative Research Centre in Space Systems, like, we didn't know if a space agency was actually going to be announced. So in parallel, we thought, we've just got to keep this momentum going. If the space agency isn't happening, or the government delays it for years or whatever, for another 30 years. So we took the initiative, like industry, to actually kick this thing off, and in the end it's worked out perfectly. It's just one of those key elements with the space agency, with the defence trying to grow the sector, and industry wanting to grow it to do the right thing. That's actually been a really critical aspect, and I've been involved even early in that, 10, 15 years before, with Senate inquiries and all sorts of activities. So NOVA's really supporting that. The workforce is really critical. We really need to grow that. We haven't got enough people now for space capabilities, and all these initiatives help to grow that workforce and diversity in the workforce. We're really struggling in Australia. We're probably behind the 8 ball. So we're lucky to have people like Megan that understand the issues and challenges, and Hannah to encourage and inspire that younger generation and add a bit of diversity. So there's all those aspects that I think we need to keep growing and encouraging with the government and other parts of the ecosystem, the university sector.
Andrew.
Yeah, so BAE Systems, the site that I'm from is actually about half an hour north of here. There's about 1,000 people on the site where I work at. If we look at the history of BAE Systems in South Australia and on our site, it's always been very strong in terms of its sovereign capability for manufacturing of electronics, manufacturing of mechanical components, the assembly, the integration, the qualification, all that sort of thing. So when you start to look at the technologies and capabilities that we've already got here in South Australia and in Australia, particularly around electronics and electronics manufacturing, and the systems that come out the back of all that manufacturing, if we can look to transition all of that capability that's in all the organisations, not just BAE Systems, but all the organisations within Australia, and start to pick up all of that capability and then bring it across into the space domain. I think that's where, when you talked about niche capabilities, Megan, that's really where I think Australia has got a really good capability to look at, well, what have we already got and what can we actually pick up and bring across into the space domain. So particularly with BAE Systems, the sovereign manufacturing, we looked at all of the aspects around, well, what does it actually take to build a spacecraft from Australia? So one of the activities that I did over the last couple of years, and we set up last year, was actually to look at bringing all of that infrastructure and investment around standing up a space qualification test lab. So that was one of the things that we did, and to be able to have that, it's now one of 2 sites in Australia where we can actually build and qualify spacecraft completely from scratch and actually have the piece of paper at the end to say that's a space qualified piece of equipment. I think if you look at that and you link that back in with, well, what are the things that you're actually qualifying into those programs? It's all the stuff around the projects and the programs, but it's also about all the research that feeds in all the technologies into those programs, where there's organisations like the CRC that's being put together that we're supporting, that actually it's the endeavours like that that are really going to start to put Australian technologies on the map. And it's really the guys like you guys who are studying to be able to bring all those technologies into capability, into the workforce that we'll need for actually delivering space capabilities from Australia. And I think, yeah, that's really where we're looking at in terms of the opportunities.
Mark.
I'll continue a bit on Andrew's theme. I think from our perspective, certainly the first pillar is kind of innovation. We need to invent tomorrow's technology. We can't resell what we've got today. And to Megan's point, those technologies need to be niche kind of technologies. They need to be leapfrog technologies, and certainly that's what we plan to do, and certainly very encouraged, and we're participating in the CRC because I think if that gets up, it's going to kind of turbocharge the sector in how much innovation's going locally, and it's just going to create a whole bunch of success stories and developments that, in the future we're going to look back on and say that was the catalyst of how it all started. I think the second point in that is we as a company and as a group and as a community need to invest. Great ideas and technology without resources to help it grow is a kind of a lost orphan. And we as a community haven't had we've had some niche innovation. We haven't had a lot of resources, so we've kind of stumbled along, and we're sort of moving into an era where we're now thinking of combining that technology development and the resources to actually kind of make this evolution possible here. And that's an important part. I think probably the final point I'd say, particularly to help the Space Agency succeed, is as a community, and I include everyone in this room here, is we need to get out there and tell the story of space and relate it back to everyone in Australia and why it's important. I recently went to my dentist a couple of weeks ago, and she started off by telling me how excited she was with the Space Agency coming to town, and it's all going to happen, and how can her children get involved in it. And she didn't know I was in the space industry, but it's a great example where just everyone in Australia and 48.8 million people, or probably the panel clicking on 1 million times. But it's a great example that if the Space Agency and us as an industry is going to succeed in future, we need to get out and make that case for why we're delivering value, because without it in 10 years' time, it's going to be a tough political argument to really continue the Space Agency. But I think we're all convinced as a community and as a panel, but our job is to get out there and tell that success story.
I had that same dentist discussion literally on Tuesday.
Same dentist, maybe?
But he knew that I was in this sector. I saw him 6 months before, and he was just asking and talking about the Space Agency.
Are there any dentists?
That is really cool.
Any dentists in the audience
Space
tonight?
dentists.
We need some dentists in space.
Just,
Oh, we do, yeah, there we go.
Andy Coronius.
Yes, thank you, Michael. The goal of the CRC, the SmartSat CRC, which stands for Cooperative Research Centre, is to bring together large organizations, small organizations, and the startup community together with the research community in Australia in space to actually power the industry and catapult Australia into the space, into the global economy, significantly growing. I think Megan spoke about the objectives and the goals of the agency, which was to increase the number of jobs and to increase the industry, to triple it in fact. And I think that is a great goal. What we would like to be known in the CRC is that we want to be working together with the Space Agency to help those objectives, to help through R&D in specific areas, in niche areas, as Megan very eloquently told us. In fact, I've heard Megan several times now, and every time I listen to her, I get inspired about space. And she's absolutely right about not just simply saying we'll do some research in space, but to pick the right areas, because Australia has some very, very clever research capability. I've heard today that DLR has recently invested $10 billion in optical communications, yet they are coming to Australia to get some of the work in quantum communications, some of that capability. Australia can contribute quite a lot. And we, in the SmartSat CRC bid, if we are successful, and please wish us good luck, if we are successful, we will be able to bring the biggest ecosystem in the history of Australia for space together, working together in a collaborative effort for industry to actually identify the areas of need, and then for researchers working together with industry, researchers in companies like BAE and CITAL and other companies, to actually build niche technologies that we can actually export, to build those jobs, to build that economy that Megan spoke of. But it's actually more than that. It's like the PC industry not only transformed the computing industry, but it also transformed every other industry. And Megan made that point in her keynote. Space has the same potential. it has the same potential to transform every industry, remote asset management, agriculture, precision agriculture, and all of the other broader economy and broader industries. So it is a much greater good that we do for the country, not just to have the 30,000 jobs, which is very critical and important for us, but the impact is much, much broader and affects every sector.
Megan, understanding that the decision on the CRC bid is totally out of your hands, it's made by a completely independent body or a recommendation to the Commonwealth Government. Would you like to make any comment about its importance to the Australian Space Mission?
Yeah, look, I mentioned right up front that communication is so vital. And when Andy and I and the team, we were sort of chatting early on, we shared some of those comments as how do we use this to go forward. And I know you're hanging on the success of the bid, but you've already rounded up
78 participants.
So, as far as I'm concerned, and given the T-shirt already exists,
That's right.
the Smart Sat CRC, I think, will be something that can get going. If the federal government supports it, then that will be additional. So I don't see it as binary. It is absolutely vital that we are part of that next piece. We don't have all the pieces that we need. It's not an area that we can just go straight into. And the SmartSat CRC, I think, can put a stake in the ground, get us connected in the right partnerships, and then we will take our place on some of those new technologies. On the good side, most of them will need to use Australia and Australia's position somehow to connect with space as well, so that we also will have a physical role in that and a lot to offer. So I'm really excited. When we set up our strategy, and Annie Daly from the agency, we've got Xandra as well here tonight, we've just been working on our 10-year strategy, and one of the things that we're trying to do is put at least 100 million into each one of those key areas. Now, the position, navigation and timing essentially has been funded, and the Earth observation. And we need to now systematically make sure that every one of those 6 areas, and we've also added access to space, which is launched, get enough funding to really start moving. So not just a dribble, and bit by bit, we will work on that as a nation. So this fits absolutely into that.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic news that you are at the stage of now looking at funding and budgetary needs over 10 years, and that's music to the ears of the industry, I think. So whenever we talk about opportunities, we inevitably have to think about challenges, and there is no doubt that in order to achieve our industry growth goals, we're going to have to face a whole series of challenges. So I've asked each of the panellists to tell us what they think the main challenges will be in their own sphere or in their own area of activity. So starting again with Hannah on the far left.
So one of the things that I think will be one of the challenges is really taking the whole industry and all the priorities that have been outlined and making sure that we really do focus them and take our collective energy and our collective effort to really produce those niche technologies and those next generation leapfrog technologies that will continue this momentum that we have here in Australia. So I think using, again, initiatives like grants from the government, individual industry investments, the SmartSat CRC, and a wide range of other programs, those will be really key in turn to keep that momentum going. And then I had one more thought, but lapsing my mind at the moment. So mind handing over to Richard.
I think one of the challenges for us is actually creating a market to use this technology. There are some very obvious markets in the military, but in the civil sector, getting the mining companies to buy Australian technology, put that into their solutions instead of taking a path of going offshore for an easy off-the-shelf solution from our good friends, is a challenge because they will look at it purely on a straight commercial basis, as they should. So I think that's one of the challenges, is getting Australian technology up into the supply chain that's used not only in government systems but industrial solutions as well. Look at the communication piece. I had a conversation with a large telecom company. I won't mention which one it was, but it's very large. And I asked them about what their interest in space was, and they had zero interest, so you can guess which one it wasn't. And they said, well, we just go and buy that. You know, we're not in the technology game, we're in the communications game. We connect people, that's our business. How do we get these sorts of organisations to understand what they can contribute to building our industry, building our capability, so that we become a global supplier, not just a global purchaser?
Some, I guess, challenges are along the lines of what you were talking about. Defence are investing $10 billion over the next decade, and traditionally, virtually all of that went offshore. The government, defence, and even the Prime Minister is saying, look, we need to try and do more stuff in country. We've got to make sure that we hold them to that and make sure we're getting Australians. We're not going to be able to do the big stuff up front, but at least getting Australians involved with elements of projects, working with our big prime contractors in country, not all this stuff overseas. So I think that is a major challenge. But on top of that, it's, as I mentioned earlier, workforce. We're crying out for workforce today. If I could get 20 people that can work in the space systems and comms area, we'd take them, because we're knocking back so much work. So the CRC is part of that process, and we need to work with other state governments on growing that workforce, the STEM, and just getting that next generation up there.
Yeah, and I think to strengthen your point as well, there's probably two aspects of that as well that I'd like to talk about. The first one is the Australian industry content and capability. So quite a lot of what we're doing and the challenges of what we're looking at now is actually, well, what investments are actually required to bring the supply chain of these space systems actually into country. And so we're going through and looking at which pieces of the supply chain do we actually have in country, and where are the capability gaps. So there's a fair amount of work that's being done and still needs to be done to look at what that investment and capability gap looks like. The second thing, I'm going to do a little bit of audience interaction here. Could I get people to put your hand up if you're an aero engineer or an aerospace engineer or an aeronautical engineer or a mechanical engineer? Show of hands. Yep. Okay. Can you put your hand up if you're a software engineer? Yep. So can you put your hand up if you're a mathematician or a physicist? Yeah, that's good. That's okay, that's actually really good.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
That is actually, to be honest, that's not actually the response that I was expecting. So I'm actually very pleased about that.
Yeah, but you have to say, if you're not on the program.
Yeah, well, actually, that's true. So putting my project manager's hat on, if you look at the way that we fill all the charts and find out, well, which of the people are we going to put into which projects, one of the key skill sets that is actually in really high demand at the moment is software engineering, backed up by strong physics and mathematics knowledge, but also it's also the fact that because we're looking to apply this into a flight dynamics and space environment, it's actually, so if I could actually pick what would be the best career path and education path, it's the aerospace engineering, and I'm an aerospace engineer, but actually having a really good and solid software engineering basis behind that as well, or the software engineering with an aerospace flavour. So much runs on software these days that that's actually one of the critical challenges to bringing this all to life.
People with systems engineering.
And systems engineering as well, yeah. It's good.
Mark.
I'm going to take a slightly different tact. Australia's going to grow up in the Space 2.0 era here, and there's been a lot of discussion around how that's delivering miniaturisation and cost savings and commercial off-the-shelf and private ventures, and to be honest, it's a wonderful evolution in our industry. The flip side of that is in Europe and America in particular, new space has come out of old space. And old space has had a lot of programs over decades that have built infrastructure, they've trained young engineers, they've given kind of bread and butter to many of the companies, and kind of new space has now come out of that to say, well, we've got a government customer and a commercial customer. And so as we grow up in Australia without that heritage of old space that paid for the James Webb Test Facility, that paid for engineers working as graduates on James Webb programs. How do we as an ecosystem kind of achieve that without all of that investment and starting in a purely commercial model? If you're building one CubeSat, you don't want to pay for a $10 million thermal vacuum chamber. It's just not going to... Well, and who paid for that? That was kind of paid for on defence programs. So you know, we need to work out as an ecosystem how we don't become old space, but how we can kind of pay for the equivalent of the roads and the rail of our industry that we're going to need, that we'll struggle to close the business case for without the big government kind of old space programs that kind of do it everywhere else. So that's my challenge.
Yeah.
Andy.
Great point. My immediate challenge is to actually get through the interview, which is next Friday. But that aside, I think our challenge has been and is already still for us to pick the right areas of research to actually leapfrog. Several colleagues mentioned the word leapfrogging, technologies and leapfrogging. I think we need to pick up those areas very carefully, because in Australia, even if we win the CRC and with the additional funding that the Space Agency will get and so on, it's still a very small investment compared to our competitors globally. They talk in multiples of billions, sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars. So we need to be very niche about and clever about what we choose to be able to compete. It's very difficult to compete in a very mature R&D market. We need to pick those that are reasonably level playing, if you like, or almost level playing. And what we did in the CRC, hopefully this is a winner, but we will see how we go. We did pick up advanced communications, advice from Egan and others, advanced communications, but also artificial intelligence, because the world is moving so fast in this area. We are at the knee of the J curve in terms of AI and where it's going in technological advances. And therefore, what we want to do is to merge that within the areas that we will be working in the space area. And that's why we called it the SmartSat CRC, because we are talking about smart satellites, autonomous intelligent satellites that are also cooperating and moving in constellations. But also we're talking about smart optical communications. Yes, the link is great, the pipe is great, but actually through significant artificial intelligence injected into software-defined radio and cognitive radio, you can actually optimize that even further and utilize spectrum in a way that it becomes efficient and resilient and secure for you. So picking those areas is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us.
Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to open up the forum to the audience, to you, the audience, and I think there may be a question waiting. Or we've certainly got a number of hands showing, so who's the first to get a mic? Yeah.
The panel, thank you very much, very interesting. What I did want to ask was, you mentioned about having young children educated so then they can have that interest, because with kids they love space. How do you propose, you mentioned briefly that you wanted to do that. How would you propose in the curriculum change for that to happen?
Well, I mean, of course, one of the challenges is that the national curriculum is an international curriculum, because it's stuffed full of about as much as you can think of. So the reality is it's really, really difficult to do that. But there is, I mean, there's a fantastic model down in the south of Adelaide, the Hamilton Secondary College, where people have taken existing curriculum and have brought space into it and worked within that framework and created an environment which is now, internationally recognised, because we get people from the United Arab Emirates coming to participate in that program. So there is a model already in place in South Australia. There is a program within the government to build some new schools, one in the north, one in the south. My challenge is to make sure the Department of Education takes space into those schools and puts that in from the start and just doesn't add it in on an afterthought. One of the things that I struggle with personally is how do we go about doing this in a way that's going to capture enough critical mass? There's a danger that we try and do everything too thinly. Are we better off having some very deep expertise in one or two schools, or are we better trying to teach everybody a little bit? And I don't know the answer to that question. So there's a lot of work to be done in there, but we actually have a model that we've actually can use from Hamilton and take elsewhere.
I also wanted to add, beyond curriculum, there's many extracurricular programs, I think, that probably people just don't know about quite as widely. Acton Space Hackathon, NASA Space Apps Challenge, and there's a wide range of other activities as well that, depending on levels in schools that children are in, they can get involved in, and it does take personal time, but I think those sort of programs are really critical as well to more project-based as well, even though they're outside of school, to get people involved and energized and encouraged to continue down those paths.
The public awareness side of the space agency's pushing is very important. So the parents are seeing it, they bring kids into it, and we're asked, we just had a practice interview for the CRC today, and we're asked that very question, how are we going to do it? And with our CRC, we're proposing a number of launches to demonstrate the technology. We're saying they're the activities we need to actually present to the public to say, look, this stuff has been happening, this is happening in Australia. Australian research and engineers are building technology that is going into space.
I'd also like to add that there's no age limit to engaging in space education. I did my Masters in Space Studies at age 45, and some of our participants in this program are quite advanced in their careers, but there is always benefit in the interdisciplinary study of space, and that's what ISU is all about. So don't forget that you can engage in space education at many levels of your career. Another question on this side of the room.
Hi, good evening. My name's Osama. I'm from GHD. We're engineering consultants. I've got a couple of questions. Megan, to you first. The government did invest or allocate $41 million funding over 4 years. Has that been defined, how that's going to be allocated? And what percentage of that is going to go towards infrastructure?
Yeah, good question. So the government provided ongoing funding to the agency, which means we don't have to go back to get the core funding. And in that 41 million, we had 15 million which provided to start the international program. So they called it seed funding. It was good they used seed. So the sense of that if we're successful with that international engagement, then we can come back and talk about that. The other part of the role of the agency is not to attract the money just into the agency. Our job is to stimulate that investment in government investment to the right players in the system. We're not looking to build the agency as the doer. The nation was absolutely clear on this point. They said to us, just do the bits that are missing and let the parts of the system do what they can do well. So our job is to attract the funding in these areas into the right players and not to hold it to ourselves and then kind of be the agent that plays it out. So as I said, our vision is that each one of those core areas will have at least 100 million over the next 10 years to get them kicked off. We also have the ballast. When you think of defence, which we've talked about, defence will spend some 10 billion over the next 20 years. So there's a very strong ballast of defence. That, if you look at NASA's budget, which is 20 billion a year, I'm not jealous. But not just in there, just a little bit, yeah, just a tenth of that would be good. But so for a country, I think what we're trying to do is focus on that and to use all of the avenues available to us to fund, not necessarily bring it directly into the agency.
We'll come back to you if we have time.
No worries.
One question per questioner, please. Up there on the left.
Hello, Titus here. I'm wondering, have there been thoughts about potential launch sites within Australia, like for to cater for different companies that has been working on launch sites or launchers in Australia, like one in Queensland, the Queensland University is working on a launch site to launch I think, Earth observation satellites. I'm just wondering, has the space agency been thinking about potential commercial or mixed-use launch sites for governments and commercial industry, and also to
Who would like
invest?
to tackle that one? Pete? Yeah.
We've already got launch sites in Australia, so Woomera has been used for launching activities for many, many years, but it's really limited. These days, it's more focused around suborbital research and testing. It's not necessarily the best place for orbital launches. But we've got two fantastic startups working on launch sites as we speak, and they're both very active and well advanced. There's one way up north, not far out of Darwin, a few hundred kilometres out of Darwin. They're called Equatorial Launch, and they're looking at equatorial launches because there's big advantages from launching up there. But there's also another startup in South Australia called Southern Launch. And Southern Launch is very good for polar type launches, unsynchronous, so you get very good coverage of the planet with those sort of launches. And they're both very active, and they've both got some really good opportunities of potential users coming out and using those two sites. So we're very excited that there's a potential of actually two active commercial launch sites, and these are being driven by our startup. So it's fantastic, and they're probably a lot more with the current way that Space 2 is actually moving. They're more likely to get off than some of the earlier big Space 1 type launch sites which you were looking at in Australia in the decades of the past. So does that answer? I think that answers your question with respect to that.
I'd perhaps add that seeing New Zealand has a successful launch site now, we've got no choice to have at least one, if not two, in the future. So yeah, we look forward to that.
But on that point, we should be afraid of working with New Zealand on the Anzac space program or something like that, where we're working together. So we shouldn't be too parochial with our closest neighbours.
I think access to space is certainly one of our priorities moving forward. And from the agency's point of view, unlike other countries, when you think of Europe and the US they started launch when they had very large and capable aerospace companies, and which had all of the safety systems, all of the backup risk systems. We're actually starting directly in the commercial realm and smaller companies. So the thing that keeps me up at night is how do we maintain the safety? How do we keep everybody safe on Earth and in space is a critical value for us. And so the agency's role, making sure we've got the regulations, making sure that when we do move into this area, that the government can support that, but also we put a framework that keeps every one of us safe in this activity. I think if we shot down a Qantas plane, it could be the end of the space agency.
We almost shot down after once.
It's actually up to Qantas to avoid the launch vehicles, not the other way around. And those of you who were at our balloon launch last year, 12 months ago, will remember that we gave all the necessary notices to CASA about our stratospheric balloon launch. And as we launched, as the balloon went up, a Qantas jet flew straight over the top. So it doesn't, anyway.
Now you're just making me nervous.
I shouldn't have told you that. Question up here on the right.
Hi, my question's for Dr. Clark. You mentioned in your presentation that Australia's got a history of research, medical research with Antarctica. Considering our unique strength with remote and rural medicine, what do you see as the future timeline for space medicine and potentially human spaceflight? And if we do have astronauts, can we please call them astronauts?
In our 10-year strategy, we're certainly looking at laying the foundations for Australians in space within that. So before we even start to launch astronauts, we have to lay the foundations to make sure we can keep them safe. The sort of things that Gordon's been looking at. We also have, of course, coming at us right now, space tourism, and both the companies involved in that have expressed interest in launching from Australia. So that's launching usually off an aircraft. and we need to consider how we do that. So there's going to be multiple ways of getting into space, and within our strategy, we certainly want to be able to look at laying those foundations.
Someone have a microphone over this side? Up the back.
A little bit of a long question. We spoke at the very beginning of Australia's very unique geological position and the relationship with space. Is there any plans or future talks about the way that the Australian Space Agency and industry can leverage our unique position geologically and I guess geopolitically to innovate further in our domain? Yeah.
I think this is probably for you, Megan.
Yes, so that capacity to look into our planetary system means that we're a perfect location to have deep space communication centres. So we have the NASA Deep Space Communications Centre in Tidbinbilla, and the European Space Agency Deep Space Communications Centre is in New Norcia. Both of those sites are absolutely vital in their networks, and particularly the European Space Agency Centre will be critical to every one of their missions over the next few decades. So when we think about our location, just looking into the planets, we want to be able to grow that capacity. We also work on international consortia, things like the Square Kilometre Array, which looks at the radio signals going right way back to the start of the universe. So that's looking further out, and as you also look at our location, and we start to have constellations that cover the globe, then you will need to have links and downlinks in Australia as part of those constellations. So at every level, we think it's important, and already. When we talk about launch, Airbus, as I said, has already chosen Australia to be the launch and retrieval site for a pseudo-satellite, so getting really low. That's now 20 kilometres above the Earth, so still within the atmosphere, but above our weather, so up in the stratosphere. And if we get 3 of those moving around, we'll have global coverage for a pseudo-satellite that sort of can climb up to 20 kilometres and move around. So you think of all of the things that you can do from Australia at every level of what we would call space, and it's a huge opportunity for us.
I wanted to give priority to a question from an audience member under the age of 12, and I think I've found a candidate up the back, so please let us have your question.
Are there any...
Well, first of all, what's your name?
My name is Azine.
Yes. And what's your question?
Are there any space-related projects for schools to try?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yes, so the short answer is that there are lots of space-related projects for schools to try. We've already heard about what is happening at Hamilton College in Adelaide. And I visited their Mars analogue site and their new STEM education site only 2 weeks ago. And they invite children from schools throughout South Australia to come and spend a day and to take various roles in a Mars mission. Now, you might have to wait a couple of years before your school is invited or your class is invited, but make sure you do that. As well as that, there are museums, there are exhibitions, movable exhibitions, as well as space exhibitions in all of our main museums. And we want your teachers to be more and more interested in teaching about space, so that your teacher can learn as much as they can about what's happening in the world of space, and then they can include that in the things that they teach you. So what grade are you in?
I am in grade 4.
Grade 4, great. Well, you're the perfect age for us to get you interested in space as a career. So don't give up on that dream. Thank you for your question. Question over this side. No? You don't?
Okay. While we're waiting on that side, I have a question from YouTube.
A question from YouTube.
Yeah. It's from James O'Connor. And he's asking a question to Dr. Clark, and that's regarding human space flight to do with scientists and whether Australia aims within a decade to get an astronaut corps, as Andy Thomas had to renationalise to become a US citizen to be able to fly. Do we have any plans to be able to fly Australian citizens?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks to James for the question. And as I said, we want to lay the foundations in the next decade to be able to consider this. Obviously, we need to have the support of the nation to do that, and it's certainly within our vision to be able to garner that support. Of course, we can't kick off anything like that until we have the support of the nation, and that's not for me to be able to say, but we are working hard to lay those foundations because it's really inspiring. When you see the International Space Station, and that's something that anyone can do, is to see where the International Space Station is tracking across. Go out at night, it moves very quickly across the sky. But what's special is you go, and it's the brightest thing in the sky as it goes across. But you look and go, there's people in there, and I think it's hugely inspiring to see that. And wouldn't it be fantastic to say, well, there's an Aussie in there? That's so right, it goes even further. So James, we want to lay the foundations in this first decadal strategy.
Thank you. Question from Mark Rice.
Thank you. So on a similar theme, actually, space is very international, relies on a lot of cooperation. And when we travel around the world, we meet lots of Australians in senior positions, often in working in space. And we see great Australian technologies, like my friends here, in doing great things. How do we see assistance to accessing international opportunities in the near future, and selling the Australian brand in space?
I'm afraid I've allowed this question and answer session to go on a little bit longer than I was supposed to. So at this stage, I have to call this most interesting and stimulating discussion to a close. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panel. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of our program sponsors, whose names you can see on the screen above me. Without their support, this program would not be possible, and we thank them all. We also thank our event sponsors who have given us support for particular events such as this event. And once again, I'd like to acknowledge the support of this evening of the City of Salisbury. Before I close, I'd like to make a very quick advertisement for our book, Australia in Space, by Kerry Doherty. It's a beautifully written and illustrated history of 60 years of Australian space, published by the Space Industry Association of Australia. Our operations manager, Sherry Dawson, is outside at a little desk, and she'd be happy to sell the book to you for a $10 discount. But if you're interested in becoming a member of the Space Industry Association of Australia, you'll get a free copy of the book. So
you've got a free copy to the back, haven't you?
Yes, the little lady.
Ah, yes, and for asking that very nice question, please take this book. So with that, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues who were involved in organising this event. It takes a tremendous amount of work from a number of dedicated staff. I'm not allowed to mention their names, but please join me in thanking all of the staff of the program. And please join us in the foyer for refreshments. Thank you.
Great job, Michael, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I misread, and I didn't bother to check, but I saw 9 o'clock.
So that's the function.